She had boarded the flight exhausted, barely awake as she found her seat in row 13. The hum of passengers shuffling bags overhead, the chatter of families and businessmen, and the rhythmic clinking of seatbelts blurred into background noise. For her, this was supposed to be just another trip, a chance to leave behind weeks of grueling work. She closed her eyes as the engines roared to life, drifting quickly into a restless sleep. But sometime after the plane leveled into its long cruise, her dreams were shattered by a voice, calm but heavy, laced with something she had never heard from a pilot before: desperation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the intercom crackled, "if there is anyone on board with flight experience, please come to the cockpit immediately." The air shifted instantly. Murmurs rippled through the cabin, confusion igniting into unease. A baby cried somewhere near the front. People looked around, searching for answers, for someone, anyone, to stand. Row 13 remained still, her heart thundering against her ribs as the words sank in. The captain's voice was more than a request. It was a plea, and in that moment she knew the impossible weight of survival might fall on her. For a few seconds, no one moved. The silence grew suffocating, every passenger glued to their seat as fear clawed at them. She felt her palms grow slick, her throat tighten. She hadn't flown in years, not since the military, not since she'd left the skies behind with a vow never to return. But muscle memory never truly dies, and within her was a training buried under layers of silence and regret. She had been a pilot once. She had flown missions that carried life and death in their wings. Yet now, surrounded by strangers, she felt like a fraud in hiding. Her body remained frozen, trapped between the pull of anonymity and the weight of responsibility. Then the captain's voice broke again, this time weaker, tinged with something worse than fear: surrender. We need help." The plane jolted slightly, a tremor rolling through its metal bones. Gasps rippled down the aisle. Row 13 sat upright, her decision tearing through her doubt like lightning. Slowly, almost against her will, she unbuckled her seatbelt, her breath uneven. Every eye followed her as she stood, the air heavy with the unspoken truth. She might be their only chance. The aisle felt endless as she walked toward the cockpit, her footsteps echoing in her head louder than the engines. Passengers leaned away, some whispering prayers, others staring in disbelief that salvation could come from someone so ordinary-looking. She pushed through the curtain, past the stunned flight attendants, until she reached the cockpit door. Inside, chaos reigned. The co-pilot slumped over, his face pale, his breathing shallow. The captain's hands trembled as he fought with the controls, sweat dripping down his forehead. Warning lights blinked furiously across the panels, alarms screaming for attention. She froze, her stomach lurching at the sight. Memories of training simulators and war zones collided violently in her mind. The captain turned, his eyes wild with desperation, and asked the question that ripped her open. "Can you fly?" The weight of every soul on board bore down on her shoulders, pressing like chains. She wanted to scream that she couldn't, that she wasn't ready, that she wasn't the person they needed. But when her eyes fell on the co-pilot's limp form, something inside her shifted. "Yes," she said softly, the word trembling but certain. She slid into the co-pilot's seat, her hands brushing the controls she had sworn never to touch again. The cockpit smelled of fear, sweat, oil, and something metallic lingering in the recycled air. Her fingers hovered hesitant until instinct began to take hold. She scanned the instruments, her mind piecing together the picture: loss of cabin pressure, electrical failure, a descent creeping lower than it should. She swallowed hard, memories of training manuals resurfacing like ghosts. The captain's voice cracked as he explained, but his words dissolved into the background. She didn't need him. She needed herself. The version of her that had once been unbreakable, who had flown into storms and come out alive. Outside, the endless sky stretched in every direction, both freedom and prison. She gripped the yoke, steadying her breath, forcing her heartbeat into rhythm. "I need you to trust me," she whispered to the captain, though her words were meant as much for herself as for him. Slowly, the descent steadied, the nose leveling out. A fragile calm spread through the cabin, but the danger was far from over. As she fought to stabilize the plane, the captain revealed the truth that sent chills down her spine. Both pilots had been struck with sudden illness, food poisoning from their last meal before departure. The co-pilot was unconscious, and the captain was fading fast, his strength ebbing with every passing minute. His voice quivered as he admitted he could not hold on much longer. That meant the full weight of the aircraft, hundreds of lives, millions of pounds of steel, was on her alone. Her mind roared with the enormity of it, the crushing knowledge that one mistake would send them all plummeting into the abyss. She closed her eyes for a second, summoning fragments of her past. She saw the desert skies, the warplanes, the comrades she had once flown beside. She heard their voices, urging her forward, reminding her of who she was before fear had caged her. When she opened her eyes again, they were sharp, focused, alive with a fire she thought she had lost forever. She wasn't just a passenger. She was a pilot, and she would not let them die. The radio crackled as she contacted air traffic control, her voice steadier than her racing pulse. Controllers on the ground erupted in disbelief when she explained the situation, but soon their voices became her lifeline, guiding her through the storm of instruments and alarms. Every instruction was a thread keeping the aircraft from unraveling. She repeated their words, her fingers moving with practiced precision, adjusting altitude, recalibrating systems, silencing alarms one by one. Outside, the sky darkened as clouds swallowed the horizon, turbulence rocking the cabin. Passengers clutched their seats, some crying, others whispering prayers. But she could not hear them. All she could hear was the hum of the engines, the rhythm of her breath, the steady flow of commands from the ground. For the first time in years, she was back in her element. She was flying, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. And though fear still gnawed at her, something greater now guided her, the refusal to let these strangers meet the same fate as the ghosts she still carried. Minutes felt like hours as the airport came into view, runway lights blinking faintly in the distance like beacons of hope. But as they prepared for descent, a fresh wave of alarms shattered her fragile calm. The landing gear refused to deploy. Panic surged in her veins, cold and merciless. She cycled the system again, her hands shaking, but the gears remained locked. The captain, barely conscious now, muttered that a belly landing might be their only option. Her stomach twisted, bile rising in her throat. A landing without gear meant sparks, fire, metal tearing against concrete. The odds of survival plummeted. Through the intercom, she heard the cries of passengers, their fear pouring into her ears like poison. She wanted to collapse, to scream that she wasn't enough, but she forced herself to stay upright. She remembered a lesson from years ago, buried deep in her memory. Sometimes the impossible was just survival in disguise. Her jaw tightened as she made her choice. She would land them, no matter the cost. The final descent was a blur of chaos and steel. The runway rushed toward them, the plane shuddering as she fought to keep it level. The wheels stayed locked, alarms howling like banshees. She lowered the nose carefully, inch by inch, her entire body trembling. Passengers screamed, some bracing for impact, others too stunned to move. Her hands locked onto the yoke, her muscles screaming as the ground surged closer. At the last second, she angled the nose just high enough to absorb the strike. Metal screamed against concrete as sparks exploded beneath them, flames licking at the fuselage. The plane jolted violently, skidding down the runway in a storm of fire and smoke. She felt every bone in her body rattle, every ounce of strength pouring into holding the controls steady. Seconds stretched into eternity until, finally, the screeching slowed. The world stilled. When the smoke cleared, the plane was intact. Against all odds, they had survived. Silence fell in the cabin, a silence so deep it was deafening. Then, like a dam breaking, cries erupted. Sobs of relief, shouts of joy, prayers whispered through tears. Passengers unbuckled shakily, some collapsing into the aisle, others clinging to one another. Fire crews swarmed outside, their lights flashing red against the shattered windows. She sat frozen in the cockpit, her hands still gripping the yoke, her body numb with exhaustion. The captain was unconscious beside her, his breath shallow but steady. Slowly, she released the controls, her fingers trembling as though they belonged to someone else. She had done it. She had carried them through hell and delivered them back to Earth. And yet, deep inside, she felt no triumph, only the heavy ache of ghosts stirring within her again. She had saved them, yes, but she knew she would never escape the skies. They would always find her, no matter how far she tried to run. Thank you for watching this story on Armed Forces Stories. If this tale gripped you, if it left you on the edge of your seat, please like this video. Share it with someone who loves powerful true stories. Leave your thoughts in the comments. And subscribe to Armed Forces Stories for more emotional and suspenseful accounts of survival, courage, and the human spirit.